so the way we like to think of it is launch is about a $10 billion TAM, and then you've got satellites that's somewhere between 30 and 50, and then the applications is like 320.
But that didn't include Starlink, it didn't include Russia or China.
China is not an addressable market for us, of course. Starlink has proven to be extremely successful, and other countries and other nations want their own sovereign capabilities of that particular solution.
Is NASA back?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. Boots on Mars is still a very, very challenging thing to do that we think we can do, but of course hasn't been demonstrated yet.
It's no secret there's been defence applications and use cases for Rocket Lab, but I wonder what's changed in your mind to be, I guess, unapologetic about it.
There's plenty going on in the world that point to importance of national security.
What potential does haste alone have?
The US in particular has fallen behind with respect to hypersonic and hypersonics research.
I do want to talk about all of the core engineering decisions that have gone into Neutron.
Always happy to put on my geek hat, but actually I'll put on my economics hat first.
How do you view rideshare on heavy lift rockets potentially being a risk for a medium lift rocket like Neutron?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question.
It's been 6 months since my last episode with Rocket Lab at their launch site in the United States. We're inside Neutron's soon-to-be launch pad.
Launch pad, that's right.
It's massive. Since then, they've made even bigger strides towards becoming an end-to-end space company, announcing new satellite hardware, software, and signing big defense contracts, while still churning out and launching their Electron rocket.
Liftoff.
Their bigger 13-ton payload rocket, Neutron, is still under development and on track for its debut launch later this year. This gives you a sense of the scale of the Neutron rocket. This stainless steel piece right here is the nozzle that will go on the end of the single Archimedes engine in stage 2. And I mean, she's not small. Peter Beck himself planted this here at the entrance of Rocket Lab in Auckland to remind the team of the mission. I want to hug it.
You're all good to come in.
Thank you so much. The day we entered the office in Auckland and handed over our phones for security reasons, the team were preparing to re-enter a third spacecraft for Varda Space Industries, a US company manufacturing pharmaceuticals on orbit. It was successful, by the way. Have they got a fireplace running in mission control? How cool is this? They've only got 4 years left. They're running out of space for all the milestones. They're going to need to expand this wall somehow. And soon that will be 2025, hopefully with a picture of Neutron. But we're here to talk to the CEO, Sir Peter Beck. How are you? Yeah, you too. Thanks for having us. And we have a lot to discuss, from earnings to acquisitions, defence contracts and engineering decisions. I hope you enjoy this conversation. And yes, we had water.
Peter, thanks so much for having us in, as always.
My pleasure.
Now, I've been meaning to say congratulations, Aviation Entrepreneur of the Year.
Oh, yeah.
Pretty cool.
It was a pretty cool event up in Hollywood and all the movie stars and stuff. That was quite fun. Yeah.
We are going to talk about that, including a certain NASA representative who was there. So I'm keen to ask you if you met them. Perhaps we will get to that. But let's just start with earnings. And this is kind of going to be a mashup of all the relevant items to tick off and get through. First of all, Rocket Lab Corporation.
Yep.
So you're restructuring the company from Rocket Lab USA. Doesn't mean too much for investors, but can you talk us through the thesis as to why a change in parent company structure was required, especially for national security?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds a bigger deal than it actually is. So for national security, it's kind of important, but also equally as so, it's important as we expand into other countries and like Europe. Enables us to do the kind of New Zealand wholly owned subsidiary thing that we've done with Rocket Lab USA, and I think it just sets us up for much more global work, and it sounds better. Like Rocket Lab Corporation sounds way better. So as you point out, nothing changes. The ticker doesn't change. Nothing. It's just a couple of words on the top of a header. So it's hardly like a giant restructure or anything like that. It's just a wee tweak.
Tariffs. Obviously, you have a vertically integrated supply chain. You make rockets right here behind us. The team is super busy.
Yep.
But I'm keen to understand your supply chain more broadly. My understanding is that you also make reaction wheels in Toronto.
Yep.
So where could and would tariffs impact the supply chain for Rocket Lab?
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head. We're very, very vertically integrated. In Canada, we ship stuff, but we do quite often we do some like transformation of the product. So when the product arrives in America, we're still doing work to it. So it's not like a tariff on the full price of the reaction wheel. And then within New Zealand, it really only if we're sending stuff up through to the States. It really hasn't affected us very much at all, our supply chain is predominantly US based. Although we're sitting in a factory here and this rocket's spitting out, I mean, this is a small part of the entire business now.
With these electrons they're making behind us, though, these are largely launched in New Zealand at Mahia. Some of them obviously go to LC2 and Wallops, but Neutron is entirely launched. When it is in play, it will be entirely launched from Virginia, but it's made here. Would it make commercial sense to start building that and making that in America, given
Neutron's not made here. The elements of Neutron, bits and pieces of Neutron are made here, but the vast majority of Neutron is made up in the United States.
It's assembled in the United States, isn't it?
No, there's like...
There are parts of Neutron made in America, like Archimedes and...
Archimedes, all the propulsion system, like 90% of the structures. So at our Middle River facility, we have an automated tape layer machine, which is a giant, awesome machine. And it's automatic tape laying down all of the domes, all of the first stage structures, all the second stage structures. So there's a lot of, there's a bit of R&D happening down here in New Zealand, but as a full production, it's vast majority is up in the United States. For obvious reasons, like it's a big rocket, like you're not shipping parts from New Zealand easily.
So insulated from tariffs.
Yeah.
Fantastic. NASA, the Mars sample return is facing some challenges, some uncertainty, I guess you could say. I know that you have a real soft spot.
It's been killed. It's not
Has it been killed? I thought that they were just delaying it. Have they fully cancelled it?
Well, I mean, I don't think anybody said they've fully cancelled it. But I mean, if you looked in the president's budget, he had said that we're not looking to do Mars sample return
Because they plan on sending humans to Mars instead.
That's right. Yep.
I know you have a real soft spot for multiplanetary missions, and not to mention that video was just really epic as well.
Yeah.
Does that mean that going to Mars is off the table for Rocket Lab, at least for now, by the sounds of it?
Well, not really. I mean, basically anything in if space wins, we win. So anything that goes to Mars, the chances are it will have a Rocket Lab logo on it. Now we'll see what happens with Mars sample return, because I think that might get a little bit interesting from a political standpoint, because China have made it very clear that they're going to go and get samples. So it'll be interesting to see what happens and if it survives through the there's a president's budget and then it goes through the whole Congress and all the rest of it. So we'll see what spits out the other end. But I mean, it's those samples are bored and cut and sitting on the surface on the planet. And a lot of people think they're just dirty old rocks. But some of those samples, have the keys to biological markers and all sorts of really, really interesting stuff. So I don't see rocks on the surface. I see like Nobel Prizes sitting on the surface of that planet. And so I think they will eventually be got, whether it's this administration or another one. It'll eventually get got.
Do you think they should be got before humans eventually get up there? Should that be something that we do as a world before sending humans up to Mars?
I don't think it necessarily needs to be digital. I think those two things can happen in parallel. I don't think one thing has to happen the other. But I mean, the reality is we absolutely have the capability to go and get those now. And their scientific value will be recognised and exploited now. Boots on Mars is still a very, very challenging thing to do that we think we can do, but of course hasn't been demonstrated yet.
NASA, they are obviously facing some budget challenges, but they have a new administrator who is an astronaut, has worked in space, incredible guy, Jared Isaacman. A, have you met him? And B, because he's there, is NASA back?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I obviously met Jared, and great inspiration for NASA. And to your point, they're really having to face some budgetary challenges, and and figure out what they're really going to focus on. So I think that's going to be interesting to see, what gets prioritised and what doesn't. And it'll be interesting to see, how much influence a new administrator can have on that, because at the end of the day, Congress still has a pretty large say in what NASA does and the programs that it executes. But not saying the administrator doesn't have a lot of control and power over that. But it's still a big job, and I don't think one person just instantly makes NASA back, or if it was even missing. So, yeah.
We've spoken before, though, about how the private space sector has started to win more contracts, and we will talk about defence and exactly what Rocket Lab is winning, especially with HASTE. But there's been this change from what used to be called the primes.
Yeah.
Right? Do you think that would accelerate now that NASA is being run by someone who has worked in the private space industry?
I think so. I think it has a good possibility to do that. I mean, someone who's experienced commercial and the power of commercial, and someone who is a business leader. Obviously, those sort of things are going to be front in mind. Yeah.
Let's talk about Europe. The Mynaric acquisition is still underway. But regardless of whether or not it's successful, fingers crossed it is for you guys. But what do you make of Europe's position in the space race? And with or even without the Mynaric acquisition, what impact could Rocket Lab have on its position? And also, what impact could that positioning in Europe have for Rocket Lab?
So a bunch of questions there. So firstly, I guess Europe is in kind of an interesting market, and we've stood back and scratched our heads about how do we kind of tap that market and be successful in it. And in order to be successful in it, you have to be basically eligible for the European missions, the European government missions. And the way Europe is set up is they have this geo-return policy, so all of the countries put all the money in a big pot in ESA, and then ESA divvy it back out to all the countries. So if you are a US firm, for example, and you don't have any European company there, then it's essentially impossible to play in that European government. But of course, if you have an entity and you have a European subsidiary, then you can actually play in that market. So
hence the acquisition, strategic.
Well, I mean, so firstly, from the acquisition standpoint, we look for technology and people first. We didn't go, well, we need to find something in Europe. What's in Europe? Let's see if we can find something in Europe. No, it's like people, technology, and then it just so happens that it's in Europe, and that gives us a nice kind of footing to continue to grow and expand in Europe. Yeah.
Where would you put Europe's position in the space race? It seems to me like they haven't been rapid.
Well, I mean, if you talk about commercial, I think you're right. But I mean, excuse me. Jeepers.
We have water.
Yeah, I'll have some water. Hang on. I've been talking all day. Right. So if you think about Europe, though, it's essentially the second largest addressable market in the world. So it might not be as big as the United States, but it's a really big market. So to not be in there would be a failure.
Did you see the ISA Aerospace launch? What do you make of that launch site? I mean, I think you have one of the most beautiful in the world, but that one's pretty incredible. Come on.
It's a second, yep.
Okay.
It's a second, definitely. The second most beautiful launch site in the world, for sure.
Is that official?
Yep.
All right, we'll make that official now.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the satellite market. And there are varying numbers out there on the TAM, the total addressable market.
Yeah,
I know that in one of your releases a few months ago, you put out some quilty research on the satellite space outlook, and it said that there were about 10,000, that research believed, satellites to be placed in orbit by 2030. But that didn't include Starlink, it didn't include Russia or China.
Yeah.
So talk to me about the size of the market that you see for Rocket Lab in satellites, aside from what the mega players already have.
Yeah, well, I think that's an important distinguishment because, I mean, we're not going to. China is not an addressable market for us, of course. Neither is Starlink and some of these others. So if you need to kind of correctly divorce that out of the equation. But no doubt, and Europe is another great example of this. The Starlink has proven to be extremely successful, and other countries and other nations want their own sovereign capabilities of that particular solution, and other even within the same geographic region, they want multiple solutions. And and I think I've said this before, is like monopolies really survive the test of history. So, Kuiper's doing a great job now with getting their constellation up and providing. So, I think we're right. We're at the beginning of this kind of constellation growth, but I would say that there's clear kind of data and points in time now where you can go, okay, this is a real thing, and it's going to continue to scale.
Can you explicitly outline the long-term game plan for Rocket Lab's place in satellites for us? You've mentioned Kuiper and Starlink numerous times before. Those are telco use cases.
Yep.
Is that what you're heading for, or are there use cases beyond that?
No, I mean we have been very clear. Nice try, by the way. We've been very clear for not. We're not discussing what our constellation aspirations may be, purely because it's way too early. I mean, without a Neutron flying at a regular cadence, then it's just too early. I mean, the secret to these mega constellations is not the satellite. It's the high cadence, low cost access to space. It's the rocket. That is the true needle mover. Like lots of people can build satellites at high volume. Well, few people can build satellites at high volume, but the real hard thing to do is get them into orbit in a high cadence. So Neutron is the most important thing, and then once we finish Neutron, then that might be the right time to start talking about the next step.
But you have been explicit about the fact that Rocket Lab wants to deploy and operate its own constellation.
100%.
That's in the plan.
Well, so if you look at the market, like the satellite services TAM is $320 billion versus $10 billion for launch. So it's the challenge is that launch is the keys to space. Like if you don't have the keys to space, then you're not going to win. But it's not necessarily a massive TAM, but it is the enabler, the single enabler for being really disruptive in that application space.
If you add on to that TAM, then the software like cybersecurity, I've seen you've launched. You have solar panels as well. I mean, talk to me about the TAM on top of just the satellites and all of the sort of subsystems and software that Rocket Lab is creating to go with the satellite market. I mean, that alone could be enormous.
Yeah. So the way we like to think of it is launch is about a $10 billion TAM, and then you've got satellites that's somewhere between 30 and 50, depending on whose report you read, and that's the buses and the components and whatnot. And then the applications is like 320. And then depending on whose report you want to read, I think Morgan Stanley have it going to 2 trillion and someone else has it going to 1 trillion.
Goldman Sachs is
whatever. So, I mean, but nobody can argue that whether it's 1.7 trillion or 2 trillion, whatever, the growth is strong. And we're not going to go back from the services that we have now. The services are only going to increase.
From an engineering perspective, how much can you differentiate the design of a satellite? Is it purely a cost game and to make them more efficiently at a lower price, or is there actually some design features in there that you can change up to make them better?
It's definitely design elements, right? You can definitely design for manufacture and select materials and material processes and all those kinds of things. I mean, Neutron is a great example of that with the stage 2. We really optimize manufacturing techniques and materials to make a stage 2 tank cost almost nothing. So, really you can optimize that. And the same seems to be said with satellites. But like anything in production, it's volume. Like volume makes a difference in everything. So the higher the volume, then the lower the price.
Speaking about production volume, the funding that you got under the CHIPS Act and also from the state of New Mexico with Solar Aero that you acquired in 2022, the plan there was to increase production of semiconductors to go on satellites. Is that still underway? Is that still happening? Have you got that funding still?
Yeah, it's still happening. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and with or without the CHIPS money, we've made a strategic commitment that we're going to continue to grow that capacity, not because just out of the goodness of our heart, but we have demand. So we kind of need to.
I want to talk to you about defence. It's something that we haven't gone too deep on yet, but it seems like this is something that you're more open about unapologetically now. And the most recent earnings, you cited an expanding national security focus. We are going to talk about what that means for HASTE and Electron and its use cases and applications. It's no secret there's been defence applications and use cases for Rocket Lab, but I wonder what's changed in your mind to be, I guess, unapologetic about it. Is it the state of the world? Are there things that you're concerned about that make you feel like the mission's more critical than ever?
No, but I would say that our national security division and our national security projects have continued to grow and grow and grow. And I think also everybody understands we live in a much more unstable world right now, and national security conversations are dinner time conversations. So it's kind of, from a New Zealand audience perspective, it's kind of demystified a little bit. But it's a really important and growing part of our business, and like I say, there's plenty going on in the world that point to importance of national security.
We haven't really spoken about HASTE in detail before, so within the defence market, I'm keen to talk about its potential. If you consider the contracts you've signed recently, US Air Force, UK Ministry of Defence, first international call-up for HASTE,
Yep.
Unit X, which is a book I'm reading at the moment, Russia, fantastic book. What potential does HASTE alone have, and what unmet need does it provide for the defence market?
So the US in particular has fallen behind with respect to hypersonic and hypersonics research. The other countries are fielding systems, or supposedly fielding systems, and like I say, the US has sort of fallen behind. And there's really only one way to get ahead, and that is go and fly and experiment and understand the environment, and that's the unique thing that HASTE does. So if you think about if you want to go Mark 25. Where do you go in the world that can provide a Mark 25 ride on a regular cadence at a low cost point? And it's Electron. It provides that test bed capability for all these Mark TB and other programs.
I thought that hypersonic was Mark 5.
Mark 5 or greater.
So you can hit Mach 25. That's 25 times the speed of sound on a HASTE rocket.
Yeah, well, I mean, when we go orbital, we're well in excess of that. So going hypersonic for us is just an everyday thing. Like we do that every time we go to orbit.
If you look at just HASTE, what is the potential for that to grow, do you think, now that you've proven your ability to win defence contracts?
Well, I mean, there's tremendous need to get this testing done. So it could be, could it outstrip orbital class launches? It could be, but for only, I would say, only for a period of time as the R&D is done. But we see it as a big market and a big opportunity.
With the NSSL on-ramp, with Neutron, we still don't know how many rockets they're necessarily going to buy, and I am keen to talk to you about that. But You've even said that was a very high degree of confidence in Neutron and Rocket Lab from the DoD. How would you describe how Rocket Lab is currently positioned in its ability to win defence contracts? Because I think it's worth mentioning that these are inherently hard contracts to win.
Yeah, well, don't forget we are a prime provider for the SDA program, which is our $500 million national security contract. So we're no stranger to being the prime on these very technically difficult programs, especially on the spacecraft side. And on the launch side, we've flown the Space Force before in many missions, so they know Rocket Lab. So when we had the kickoff meeting just recently, and the team, we're working through Neutron, like it's all old friends again, right? So they've worked with us on NRO projects, they've worked with us on Space Force projects, so we're a very known quantity. But I think it is important because the NSSL are the most important, the highest echelon of missions that you can go for. So there is only just 3 other companies that are trusted to launch these missions, and now Rocket Lab as well.
And you're the only public one, I believe, in that mix.
Yep.
Incredible. Do you have any idea as to how many Neutron rockets they could look to purchase? I know that it's an indefinite quantity. Is it reliant on that debut launch going well?
No, so it's a $5.6 billion contract that runs out until 2029, when the next phase is on-ramped again. And across that $5.6 billion, there's a whole bunch of missions and stuff. The first kind of gate onto it is a successful first flight. Once we have a successful first flight, then we're eligible for the task orders, and we can bid on various projects. So, the first flight is an important milestone, but it's not be all and end all.
Let's talk about Neutron.
Yep.
How's the team feeling? How are you feeling?
Well, we're all super excited. It's a fun
Same.
time of the project. Yeah, it's a fun time of the project where big pieces of hardware are coming together and we're doing big tests. It's also a pretty stressful part of the project as well, because now we have, in many cases, flight articles, and we're doing the big tests. So, on earnings you may have seen the full stage 1 upper module where we've got fairings opening, closing, canards swinging. It's all flight hardware in there with, flight actuators and flight software and whatnot. So, that goes through a pretty rigorous test campaign.
I might be asking for too much here, but is there any chance you can give us more clarity on the launch window, a month, perhaps?
No, that would be completely disingenuous of me because, we can plan for a date, right? But the reality is that we have a lot of big tests to get through, and until we get through those tests, it would just be, like I say, disingenuous to put a day on it for sure.
I agree, and we wish you all the best of luck. We're all very excited. Can you talk us through the very first launch, though? I understand there's no customer payloads on
Correct.
it, so what's a successful first flight for you and the team? Is it just for it to go up, or are you testing some recovery as well?
Yeah, no, so the definition of success for us will be we put the second stage in orbit, and maybe that's a little bit lofty, but because I think there's been one rocket in history that it's been successfully put there first,
Blue O, just did it.
Exactly right, yeah, but that was, 20 years of R&D and development, not 3 or 4. But that's certainly very clearly the goal, and we're running exactly the same process as we did with Electron. We're not putting a rocket on the pad or going to fly it until everybody's at least 92% confident that everything's going to work. So we're following exactly the same process we did in the past. For Flight 1, we'll aim for a soft splashdown, and there's a few unknowns there. If we have a successful soft splashdown, then next one we'll just slip the barge under there, and see if we can stick it.
Just slip ROI underneath it.
Exactly.
Let's talk about sticking it, because on paper it doesn't sound too hard, right? You've made this a normal barge, fantastically
Super
called
easy.
return on investment. No, it's not. And then you want to land it on it, but imagine there's waves and swell
Yep.
and wind. It's a big stage to come back down and land on it, but if there's some movement on that barge, how does that work?
Well, the barge is not just a piece of steel. I simplify it tremendously. It's there's over 1 megawatt worth of generators on board that run all these electric thrusters, and it has to station keep within a very, very high accuracy. So there's currents in that particular piece of the ocean, so we're fighting against those currents. And the rocket guidance needs a point to come down to, and if that point is moving as well as the rocket's moving, then that thing gets a little bit harder. So it has tremendous thrust power to station keep, and you've seen the scale of the barge. It's a very large barge, so we don't have to worry too much about heave and yaw and those kinds of things. But the barge in itself is a completely autonomous vehicle. It's not just a floating hunk of steel anchored to the ground.
Interesting. So there's engineering built into that as well.
Huge amount of engineering. Yeah. No, is that there is a lot in that barge.
And the stage for it to come back down, does it have legs
Yep.
that stick out?
Yep.
And it lands? Talk us through that.
Yep,
that
no,
engineering.
it's fairly traditional in that sense. The one thing that we don't do is like an atmospheric braking burn. We have through the Electron re-entries, we've developed a technique that avoids having to do that. And what that means is you don't have to carry as much propellant. So you really only have to, you've got a targeting burn and then a landing burn, and that's it.
Does that reduce some risk of it blowing up when it lands if there's less propellant in it?
No, you'll land with the same amount of propellant,
Right.
but
You
it's
don't
just,
burn as much.
You don't have to save as much on the way up. It just makes it more efficient. And every time you want to restart an engine, it's always a bit of a trick and a bit of an event. So the less engine starts you have, the better. And if you look at the geometry of the vehicle, it's a very fat vehicle for its payload lift, and we want that really high ballistic coefficient for manage the heating on the way in. So this is kind of the difference between a rocket that was appended with reusability and a rocket that was just started from scratch to be reusable.
I do want to talk about all of the core engineering decisions that have gone into Neutron. So if you don't mind putting on your chief engineer hat,
Yep.
stick it on for a minute. If you can talk me through all of those core decisions from the Hungry Hippo fairing
Yeah.
and how that's attached to that first stage, right down to Archimedes. But if you can start at the
Well, I'll put on,
top.
I'm always happy to put on my geek hat, but actually I'll put on my economics hat first, because that's what drove everything. So at the very start of this project, we have very clear targets of the economics we want to meet, right? Like 50% gross margin on this thing. It has to be competitive what's there in the market, and that's like step one. Because and this is where a lot of, I would say, space or more generally rocket companies go wrong, is they build cool stuff, but that's great. But the most important thing is, if you want to do it over and over again, is you have to have the economics right. So that kind of, if you start with that point, then you don't want to be throwing away fairings, and you don't want to be picking them out of the ocean, because that costs money. You don't want to be breaking over rockets on the launch site and having all those things, because that costs money. And then you want to land with your first stage as much intact, with the least amount of work possible to be done on it before you have to launch again. So that comes down to managing thermal loads, so you don't have a whole bunch of stuff to replace because it's got hot and all the rest of it. From a propulsion perspective, you don't have time to clean soot out of engines and all the rest of it. So you end up with the methane oxygen propellant combination, so you don't have any sooting in your engine. And then you need an engine that is reusable over and over and over again. So that drives you to a very benign design point of the engine. So the engine's not sitting there like a grenade, like completely stressed out. It's sitting there with a lot of margin in it. So that drives you to a closed cycle, because you get much, much higher ISP. So all of these decisions run all the way back up to the economics decision about how do you do this economically. It's not, it'd be very easy from an engineer, you can get all geeked out and go down the wrong paths, but everything is anchored right back there. And it's not just anchored with me. So you go and talk to any engineer working on Neutron, and as they're designing a component, they're thinking about how much it's going to cost to make, how they're going to produce it in any kind of volume. It sounds crazy, it just sounds simple, but in a lot of companies that bit comes way down the chain. It's like complete design for perfect function and all the rest of it, and then we'll worry about how much it costs and what it takes to machine it later, for example. Whereas all the engineers over there, that is like they're trading those things of equal importance with reliability and cost and all those.
This kind of goes back to the very first question, right? The structure of the company. And I guess that is part and parcel of the success of a company like this. You could say about SpaceX too, about the chief engineer also being the CEO and having an executive position, so the money goes hand in hand with the engineering decisions.
Yeah, and also, we've always, we've never been flooded with cash, and I never want to be flooded with cash, because I think that drives the wrong culture and the wrong engineering decisions. The teams that are kind of lean and hungry, ultimately produce better results. If you're kind of fat and lazy, then that's what your designs look like.
Ernest Rutherford, we don't have money, so we have to think.
Exactly right. Exactly
Big fan
right.
of him. Big fan of him. If we can then go back to the market for Neutron, and this is a question I've been meaning to ask you for a while, but I feel like it's prevalent now that we're getting to the really pointy end, excuse the pun, of Neutron launching. You've made it very quick. You've developed this rocket in record time at a record low cost. But the market has obviously shifted throughout this time as well. Rideshare is now in play. How do you view rideshare on heavy lift rockets potentially being a risk for a medium lift rocket like Neutron? Or are you seeing enough demand in the market, perhaps probably from the defence market, for enough customers specifically wanting their own rocket to fly on?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, but I honestly don't see it any different to the argument between rideshare on a medium class rocket and the rideshare on Electron. It's the same thing. People want the same, the same order parameters and the same results. Look, I'm sure that super heavy launch may rob some out of medium and what, but of all the things I worry about at night, that is just not one of them. It's like, are there going to be enough satellites for us to launch? It's just way down here on the worry list. So, capacity and cadence are the two things that all our customers and the whole industry is constrained by.
Do you see the space industry, specifically launch, moving to like a cost per kg type model, similar to how in tech there's like cost of compute? You don't see that happening?
No, it's a stupid model. Absolutely stupid. I mean, it makes no sense.
These tech companies are worth multi-billions of dollars.
Well, no, it might work for them, but I mean, from a rocket perspective, because nobody actually buys cost per kilogram. Like, if you go and buy an Electron rocket, and your satellite is 100 kgs and it can lift 320, we don't give you back the 120 or 220 kgs of extra capacity, because you bought the whole rocket. And it's the same in any launch vehicle. Like, just because you don't use that capacity doesn't mean you pay less. I mean, it is a fixed price thing. So cost per kilogram is a very tidy metric for financing type people to rate one rocket against the other and all the rest of it. But the reality is nobody has ever bought cost per kilogram, a rocket on a cost per kilogram basis.
Fascinating. Thank you so much for your time. So Pete, always good to chat.
Likewise, thanks.
Thanks for watching Markets with Madison. If you enjoyed this interview, please hit the like and subscribe buttons below. I do all of the research for these episodes myself, so your support means a lot. I always love to hear your feedback and ideas, so please drop any thoughts in the comments below. Now go put your money to work.